We're going to be making a new project in here using Xcode. We're going to use this to take a look at the process it takes to actually link our view controllers to our storyboard so we can have a more complex application inside Xcode and therefore into iOS. Again, we're going to start off with making a new Swift project. As always, we're going to choose the single view application. Even when we do more complex apps, we're going to always start with that same framework because it allows us to get a more easy to go, ready to start off thing. So go ahead and click next right there. And our product name, I'm going to call this Transitions Project because we're using this to show the idea of transitions and other pieces along with that. Again, we're going to use Swift as our thing, organization identifier CTech, and at this point we're not worrying about core data or unit tests. We can skip past those today. Hit next again. We've made our default project right here. So again, the first step is get it in GitHub. So open up GitHub Desktop if you haven't done so already. We're going to drag that folder in and create this project. Not a repo, choose create and add. Brings us our basic framework. Go up to repository, repository settings, choose our ignored files. That adds one file, removes a few, down to 9 changes. We're going to go ahead and add a summary and create a project. Again, using the idea of a full sentence, part of our commit message, commit to master. We're going to go ahead and go over into our ViewController and our app delegate. And we're going to do a little bit of organization with this as well. So I'm going to hold the command key down and select both of them. And I'm going to right click and choose new group from selection. I'm going to call this the controller. And again, all I have to do to do that is to right click on the file, choose new group from selection, and then pick controller. And go ahead and I could do the same thing for the storyboard files. Right click on that, new group from selection, and put that in view. And so I have my transitions controller and transitions view groups. Now this folder that we see right here inside Xcode is not an actual folder for the code, but rather organization simply right here in this structural thing on the left-hand side of our project navigator. This doesn't actually move anything or create folders like it does inside a clip. Go ahead and if I look at my project status here on GitHub Desktop, you can see that my uncommitted changes. I didn't move anything like from folder locations. It just gave information to change the way the project is set up. What we're going to be doing now is we want to be able to use the idea of creating a new view controller. So we want to make sure that we have open at this time our left-hand window and our right-hand window, aka the navigator window and the utilities window. Both those need to be open. I'm going to go ahead and close out my document outline for this because I don't need to see it right now. But I have right here in the center and off to the side, I have a view controller. So this is the default view controller. We know it's the one that's the default because we see it has this lovely arrow right here that points into it. That's the one that says that this is the one that starts the app. And I'm just going to shift this over here a bit so it's on the left-hand side. Just give me a little bit more space because we're going to be adding a new view controller. And it's amazingly hard how we do this. As you can see, we have my object library open right here. And the first thing in the object library is a view controller. So what we need to do is we're going to drag the view controller from the object library into our storyboard. I'm making sure, of course, that I've got the correct storyboard open. Make sure I've got the main storyboard selected. So I have the main storyboard selected. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag a new view controller in. So I'm just going to drag it out from this. As you can see, it pops up a new view controller. I'm going to put it just right here, right next to it. And so you can see right now that I have 2 view controllers. If I go ahead and I go to my zoom down to 50%, you can see I've got 2 view controllers inside that. So I'm going to go ahead and move this up here just so we can see this a little bit better. And so I have my view controllers listed right there. So the first step that we do when adding a view controller is we have to actually drag over a new view controller from the object library into the storyboard itself. That's step 1. Step 2, we're going to go up and into our controller group, and we're going to go and add a new file. So right click, new file. It's a Swift file. Make sure that's selected. Choose next. This is whatever file name .swift. As you can see right here, it's going inside that lovely folder with this. It's inside translations. Now, I myself really like the idea of having organized code. As you can see right now, my view controller Swift and all that stuff is all in that one single file. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. I'm going to add a new folder. And I'm going to call this the controller folder and hit create. So I have my controller folder that's inside my transitions project. And the name of the file is going to be the name of my new view. So I'm going to call this one updated view controller. That means I know that it's a view controller. And which one is it? It's the updated view controller. Again, keeping my naming convention so it's kind of boring. The name reflects what it is and what it does. It's going inside the controller folder that is inside the transitions project folder and hit create. As you can see right here, it's now inside that same group, the controller group. I have a ViewController.Swift and updated ViewController.Swift. Notice right here that my updated ViewController Swift, the file that it starts off with is import foundation. If I take a look at my ViewController.Swift, it starts with import UIKit. So I'm going to need to do the same thing. I'm going to change this instead of import foundation. The first change will be import UIKit. And then down below that, I also need to declare the class just like it was on the other. So I'm going to do class. And the name of the class is just like in Java, where it's the name of the file. So the class and the file have the same name. So class space updated ViewController. And then after the updated ViewController, we're going to do a colon and a space UI ViewController. So what this has done right now is I created a new class. This class is called updated ViewController. It inherits from the UI ViewController. That means that this class right here can do everything that that class can do. UI updated ViewController knows everything that UI ViewController knows as well. So this is how we show the idea of inheritance in Swift. It uses a colon to separate the inherited class on the left from the parent class on the right. And so that matches, as you can see, if we look over at ViewController.Swift, look up here. We have class ViewController extends or inherits from the UI ViewController. And inside this we have two override functions. We're only going to copy one of them. We're going to make our own override func called viewDidLoad. So we'll go ahead inside this. We're going to add the override func, meaning it's a method, and it's called viewDidLoad, parens, squigs, and my viewDidLoad is spelled wrong. It should be a lowercase v. Make sure I fix that. So the override func, this means that I'm going to do differently from the parent class. So my viewDidLoad in here is separate from my parent's version. I'm redefining it. I'm overriding this method. So viewDidLoad exists inside UI ViewController, but this subclass, updated ViewController, has its own version. We're going to call the previous version of the method right here using what's called super.viewDidLoad. And that's going to go up and it's going to do the UI ViewController version of this method first. And then below here, we first load the parent's version of the page. So this will do the automatic what the parent knows how to do. It'll load all the pieces that the parent does by default. And that's with that super keyword. And then after the super call to viewDidLoad, we're going to load our own version. And we'll talk about what that means as we actually build this object. Okay? So this is a great time to hit save. I'm not going to commit quite yet. I'm going to do one more thing. We're going to link the file together. So we have this file called updated ViewController. It's inside our project. We are now going to link the storyboard to this part. So I'm going to go to the storyboard. We have our utilities window open. I'm going to click on that new ViewController. And we're going to show that we have it selected by opening this up. So I have the ViewController scene right here. So we have two different ViewController scenes. I have this one. It moves the top one. I have this one. It's the second one. I make sure if I click on the bar right here, it selects it. Or I can click on the yellow icon right here, which is the name section for it. Either one would be appropriate. I'm then going to click on the Identity Inspector. That's one that looks like a newspaper. And on the Identity Inspector, it needs a custom class. That custom class says who was in charge of this file. So I'm going to use that right here. I'm going to go to this class on the ViewController, and because I've already made my file, I can click on this down triangle, and I can type in updated ViewController. It auto-senses what I'm typing in, and press enter. I know I've got the right one because under here in the module section, notice I have that gray text that says the current project and then the name of the project. So again, the process, after I've created the file, I click on the other ViewController. I click on the yellow circle section. I click on the identifier for the whole project. I then click on the Identity Inspector. That's one that looks like the lovely newspaper icon. I choose or type in the name of the .class file right here. I can either start typing in or click on the down triangle to select it from there. I know I've got the right one when the module says the current module - project name. And now I have a link directly from this file to this GUI in my code, already set up and linked. I want to hit save again because I made some actual changes, and now I definitely want to commit. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to GitHub Desktop. As you can see, we have our changes right here in main. In our storyboard has a reference. We have our updated ViewController has a reference. So we have that code that we have listed right here. Our main storyboard, if we look at the XML on that, we would see that we would have a reference in here. We have that member ID to ViewController. On this commit message, again, we want to make sure the idea that we are always giving a one sentence or so explanation of what we're doing as our commit message. If we need to give a more detailed explanation, we have this description section. One of the things I recommend doing within our project, especially at the beginning level, so we can make sure we keep track of what we're doing, is when we have this set up, until we have a really clear definition of what these are, I recommend going over here to our ViewController, get that selected right here on the our view, go onto our identity inspector, get this up to 100%, and on the view itself, on the background, so we can make sure we can keep track of the right ones, I recommend changing the color of these. Pick a color that's really easy, like green to start, and then have this one, and have this one be like, say for example, nice little purple. Magenta is always a great color. This way you can easily tell the difference between the scenes. I saw that we had one of our students already doing that, and that's one of the things I want to make sure we bring up, because it's an easy way to tell the difference between which screen goes to what, because when they're blank and white, it's really hard to tell them apart. So to keep a brain difference on that, that's a great way to do so, is to highlight the identity, go to the attributes inspector, which is the one with the arrow with the line going across it, and we can make the change in the background of that so we can see as we're putting this together to keep them separate. So we made one other change for that. Again, it's a slightly major change. So we only made a change on our storyboard right here. We had it changed that we're having this, it's now a custom color right here. So we have that one is moved change color on that one. This is a change color to that one. So we have those two changes we made for this. Again, not a big change, but enough of a change we can keep track of it. If you notice, when I have that right here, I can't make changes to the code on the attributes inspector when it's zoomed in. So if I zoom that down to 12.5%, I have this clicked on and selected, but my attributes inspector does not have the ability to change that. Xcode specifically has it set up so that when you want to make changes to this, you have to either have the individual view selected, which zooms it to automatically 100%, so you then have access to make changes. And if you want to do anything that's code change related, like changing color, adding buttons, manipulating connections, you have to have this set for 100%. So that's just one of those things you'll notice as you do this, is that 100% is required to make any changes with the attributes inspector or adding component pieces that connect pieces, add buttons, etc. So one of the other things that we have for that. So we now have our clear delineation between our two screens. We have one that's green, this is the starting one. We can tell it's the starting one again because it has that little gray gradient arrow that goes into it. We then have our other one, this purple one that we're going to switch to. And so to make it so we can have that happen, we're going to do a transition between them. The transitions in iOS are called segues. To add a segue, it's really, really hard. It's extremely hard. What we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and over here in the view object library, I'm going to add a button. I can start typing, immediately go down to it. And I'm going to be really boring. I'm going to put that button right here. Put it so it goes in the middle of the screen. And I'm going to call this the change screen button. And again, because we have that right here, I typed it up, it doesn't actually fit automatically. But if I have that selected, and I do the command and equal sign, it automatically fits the size of that. Again, that's using the command and equals to make that so that it'll automatically fit. And so I have a button now on my green screen, which is my first one. And what I'm going to do to link that button to this is I'm going to have the button selected. I'm going to control drag from the button to the other view. And I'm going to choose the option right here. I have a segue. There's action segues. I'm going to choose the show segue. And it creates a line where I have a line pointing from this to there with the arrow inside it pointing to the new screen. But I also have a little box in here that has the arrow pointing back to it. So it's the information that it can go backward. So to do that again, I'm going to go ahead and delete this just so it's selected. So I click on the button so the button is selected. And I control drag from the button to the other view controller. So I'm control dragging from the button. You can see it's highlighted up here on the top left of my document outline under Change Screen button. It's highlighted. It's the one that I'm linking. I control drag from the button to the other view controller. It highlights itself. Once it's highlighted, I can then release. I choose the option for show. It creates the lovely line right here with the arrow going from the green to the purple, with inside the circle a little line and arrow pointing back. Because the type of screen that it is how we're making that segue. As you can see, it also adds a show segue to updated view controller. It's this lovely blue. It highlights it right there and moves it back to the button because that's what it's tied to. As we look over here in its attributes inspector, again, that's the one with the little pointing down arrow with a line across behind it. It highlights it. It needs an identifier. And so we're going to give it an identifier right here. And I use my identifier naming convention as 2 and then the name of the screen. So my identifier segue naming convention is 2 and then the screen name. In this case, it's 2 updated. So its identifier is 2 updated. Identifiers must be unique. So if you have a bunch of things going to the same screen, it's important that you give them a good name. So segues have an identifier. The identifier needs to be a string. It needs to be a unique string. And the class prefix means it's going to start with a 2 because it's going to something. So this is the 2 updated because it's going from this to the updated screen. I'm going to go ahead and put a commit message in, and we're going to redo that one more time. Added segue. It's not a segue, it's a segue. My mistake on some of my earlier videos. Added segue from main screen button to updated view controller. Again, commit to master because we always want to make sure our commits happen. As you can see, I've made not much of a project yet, and I already have 4 commits on here. I'm keeping this up so I can always have a nice series of commits, keeping that ready to go. So to remove this again, I'm going to go ahead and remove it. Click on delete. Gets rid of it. As you can see, there's no longer a connection there. Click on the button and do control drag the other screen. I choose show. Gives me a pop-up link right here. The identifier section is under the attributes inspector of the segue. And again, in order to do anything nifty on this, if I go ahead and zoom that down to 25%, I click on that. That one actually will let me do it, so I can actually change that one. So I can actually name the identifier at 25%. Yeah. But I can't do anything nifty on this. You can't do anything nifty on the views at anything other than 100%. The one exception is the the segues. Segues I can change at a lower percentage rate. So that's actually kind of nice. So we've got that saved. We already made our commit message to that, so we have our segue named. Now we're going to link that to code and see how that works. So we're going to go ahead and switch to the code side. At this point, I'm going to close my left-hand window. I do that again with keystroke as Command 0. I'm going to leave my document outline open. I'm going to leave my segue open and my utilities window open. And I'm going to show that I've got the appropriate link on that by doing Alt-Command-Enter. And right now I have my lovely view controller listed right here. It's selected with that lovely line right there. If I click on the view, I have access to 100%. I'm going to give a reference from this button to here. As you can see, it has the link to ViewController.swift as it should have. If I go over to this view on my updated view controller, this side should change to reflect that new file that we just made. Let's see if it happens. I click on View. I click over here, and look, it lists to that updated view. So we have that correctly linked right there, so we can see that happening in our automatic change of our assistant editor. We're going to go ahead and go back though to this view right here. I click on that. I now have this lovely section right here. So what I want to do first is I want to give a reference to this button so I can change it, and we can load from screen to screen. So I'm going to do what we've done earlier. I get in the button so it's highlighted. I'm going to do control drag from the button into the class below my did receive memory warning method and choose the option to make an action. And the name of this is Twitch Screen to Updated. Again, keeping the idea that we're having a name that explains what it is and what we're doing. The type of that calls it is a UI button. We always want to make sure we adjust that so it's properly identifying who it's coming from. So we have an action. We named it to what it explains what it is. What kind of thing is calling it? In this case, it's a button. The event, of course, will be the touch up inside for button action. And our argument on there is sender. We could do none, but sender actually makes sense for this, and we'll go ahead and hit connect. As you can see on my code, I now have the @IBAction. It's linked in IBAction because we have the circle inside the circle, and when I hover over, you can see that it highlights the button and gives its name right there. Question. So the question was, why did I do the IBAction? I like to make sure I actually give a full set of code that goes along with it, rather than simply relying on the just the graphic side of it. And that way I can, if there's any other thing I need to create or load or pass information, I can create that all right here inside the code. We have the IBAction. We can tell it's correct because we have the circle and it highlights like I just said. We know it's a func, like it's supposed to. Its name makes sense. I'm going to go ahead and give this an enter so my squiggle's vertically aligned because it's the way I like it. And to load a screen programmatically, this is where we, because sometimes we need to have other things happen. Sometimes it happens separately from simply a segue. We have a line of code to make that occur. And it's called perform segue with identifier. And so that's the line of code that we call to open a screen. And then we put a string, a set of that, and comma, sender. Inside the strings, aka the quotes, that's where we put the name of our transition identifier, aka our segue we made. And that, in this case, right here, that's the to updated from main is what we put right here. So to updated from main. Again, we have the linked @IBAction. We have the func defining that this is a function or a method. We have the name that reflects what it's doing. It's passed a UI button. And then because the perform segue with identifier needs to have a button reference, that's why we made sure we have the button right here as the sender variable. And so perform segue with identifier, and we're performing which segue? The to updated from main segue, and we're passing the sender is the reference to that button call that we had originally. So we're going to go ahead and Command Save, Command R, and test this out. We have a build successful. The code compiled just fine. We're going to see this run. Here's my change screen button. I click the button, and I have now changed my screen. So the screen itself change is effective. Again, we had the control drag over, move it in, added the @IBAction, and called the method call perform segue with identifier, passing the name of the transition and who called it. So the question was, mine's giving me a thread 1 signal interrupt. And so if I do Command Shift Y and pull that up, if I look right up here at the top of my debug window, and I scroll up to the very top of it, so scroll to the very top, you'll have a nice little detailed explanation of why it crashes. And in the section in about here-ish of the screen, it would say unidentified selector blah 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 blah, which means you're using you type the name of something wrong. Like say for example, instead of calling to updated from main, you called to dated from main, because it wouldn't know what that thing is. So it's important that this identifier is spelled exactly like it was inside the storyboard. So I go to my storyboard, click on this, and I go to my Alt-Command-0 screen, and I notice that here that this is the updated identifier, to updated from main, and that's where that usually comes into play. I have a wrong selector. So make sure that the spelling of it right here, copy, matches exactly right here inside the quotes. And that's usually where that comes into play. Not always, but usually. So quick review of what we've done before we move on. We added a function, an IBAction function, that allows us to send more information or calculate stuff before we switch pages. Again, this is the idea of having a good code design on top of simply functional code. And so the last line of our switch screens would be the call to perform with segue. That exists in the calling screen. We have on our other screen, our updated ViewController.swift, we haven't done anything in it yet other than make our viewDidLoad method where we would make changes happen. We'll be addressing that in just a bit. We have our storyboard inside our view package, main.storyboard. Looking at our storyboard, we have a button that we added. We added a transition or a segue. To add the segue, we did the control drag from the button to the other view. And in order to do that, we have to have this set up at 100%. You can't do changes like that at a smaller percentage. We also did color changes of our view controllers to make sure we can easily, clearly identify which screen is which. It helps make things very easy to see on that GUI until it's finalized. If you don't like the colors, use it only to organize your code to start off with, and then remove the colors when you go back to the actual version of the app. Perfectly acceptable. To access the name and structure this, we select the segue on the storyboard, and in our Alt Command 0 section, again Alt Command 0, we go to the Attributes Inspector, and that's where we can give it a name. This string name identifier must be unique in order for that to be useful.